This is a Podfire production.
Hi, I'm Ryan and welcome to the Neuronirvana podcast, where we dive into everything to do with mental health and well-being. Anything that can improve your life, we're here to talk about. All right, welcome to this week's episode of Neuronirvana. This week I've got Trystan Warren on the episode. Welcome, Trystan.
Thank you, Ryan. Good to be here.
Yeah, so I've only met Trystan today, so I'm looking forward to talking to you. So Trystan is a clinical psychologist. He's got a few bits of paper. Do you just want to quickly rattle off them bits of paper because I forget what what they were?
Oh yeah, we've got standard BSc in psychology, an honours, and a couple of masters in addictive behaviour and clinical psychology, all from Liverpool University in the UK.
Yeah, nice. So I was just going to say that. So you grew up in Liverpool, if you can't pick that accent for people that don't know. So yeah, Liverpool. So you were born there?
Yeah, I was born. So I'm in my 50s now. I'm not going to reveal the precise
49.
Yeah, something like 49. But yeah, the background's really quite interesting. Come from Housing Commission, so it wasn't a privileged upbringing, but I was fortunate enough to have some really lovely people around me, my mum and her parents, who unfortunately have passed away now. But as much as it was quite rough and ready, there was also a lot of love and support and safety and nurturing and encouragement to further my education, which has served me really well in the long run. You know, I was fortunate to have that support going forward.
Yeah, cool. So I don't know much about Liverpool at all. So yeah, what was it like growing up in Liverpool?
Okay, not to paint too negative a picture, but sort of I grew up through the 70s and the 80s, and then Liverpool was very, very deprived area, the north of England, whether it be Liverpool or Manchester and Newcastle. Lots of unemployment through the 70s, and the big dockland area. Liverpool was the biggest dockland in the world at one point, until the 50s. Sea level globally was measured in the salt dock out of Liverpool. So yeah, it was a cornerstone in terms of the growth of England. And then through the 70s, the docks went to rack and ruin, basically, and high unemployment. Liverpool became a free port in the 80s, which then was an avenue in through drug dealing into Europe. So there was a lot of spillover. Liverpool had a huge heroin problem through the 70s, 80s, and into the early 90s. So you can imagine the social impact of that. Lots of aggression and frustration, people unemployed without meaning and purpose. And so the consequences of which were pretty dire. You know, a lot of people suffered, and there wasn't a great deal of money around, and Liverpool gained a reputation for being a pretty tough city, and not many prospects. Fortunately, sort of through the 90s, it reinvented itself, and now there's lots of IT and lots of medical sort of advancements through the university, which has got a great reputation, has come back into vogue. And I was fortunate enough to go to the university, which is a red brick university, quite up there in terms of, you know, Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Liverpool. But as I say, during my childhood, it was pretty rough and ready, Ryan.
Yeah. So paint us a bit of a picture of like you growing up in that area. Did you firsthand? Did you go down a path of like the drugs and the violence or anything like that personally, or like family members, or?
Well, yeah, it was sort of, you know, hit first and discuss seconds. That's sort of how it was rough and ready, you know, and sort of street life, if you like. And without giving too much away, I've got a history of, I could have gone down a particular avenue, and again, just to reinforce, I was so fortunate that I had some lovely people around me. Lots of guys I grew up with are either dead, addicted, or in jail. And I could see that for myself at one point. Again, you know, I was guided very positively to get tertiary education and follow our passion. The psychology comes about. So I was very pro Liverpool because it was such a working class city that initially in sort of high school, I wasn't really that focused. Psychology wasn't on the curriculum. And
was there a moment in time that you can think of that
it clicked in.
Yeah, that you're like, I'm going to do this, and what led to that point?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if our audience know that much about Freud and Jung and Adler. So Sigmund Freud, people will have heard of, spoke about procreation and sexual attraction, and he had 2 students. So Freud, in light of, he's not that popular, however, in light of genetics, lots of the things that he was quite out there make sense. And I think it's retrospectively, people are beginning to recognize some of the things he touched upon were great. That's by the by. He had 2 pupils, a guy called Alfred Adler, who said it was all about power, control, manipulation, and a guy called Carl Gustav Jung, who speaks about a collective unconscious, that we're all connected, and which is great stuff. And I'm a big Jungian. Now, Jung said, and this is to answer your question, that was a bit convoluted, Ryan, but he said, I have traveled to many places and I have seen many things, but in my opinion, Liverpool is the center of the universe, right? So for me,
wow.
for me as a young guy, I took that as an ego thing, that we were just great people from Liverpool, and it was quite downtrodden. So any boost I could give the city, I looked for. What he actually was speaking about was Liverpool's Dockland being a point on the Eden line between the eastboard of America, Boston, New York, England, basically Liverpool, and the west coast of Africa, between trade and I have to say it, there was slave trade, but trade and being part of the Industrial Revolution, being the major port in the world. That's what Jung was talking about. I misinterpreted it, that Liverpool's just a great city.
How often does that happen? But we hear something and we put that through our own filters, and then we, internalize that to be completely missing the point. Yeah. And you spoke about Sigmund Freud and him being quite out there and stuff like that. But to be honest, from what I've seen, all the people that have made dramatic changes in the world have, at one point, were considered crazy, or one point were considered out there, and because we have got a certain baseline of what we think is normal, but it's them critical thinkers and the people that go out there and put themselves out there
and to challenge the boundaries.
Yeah, and they might not always be right. So sometimes he was wrong, but it's the path that he grooved. I suppose by being out there, and he was wrong sometimes, but then he was right. And I think sometimes for our listeners, you are going to be wrong sometimes, and that's okay. It's the impact that you make, and to have the courage and the conviction to go out there and to try and make that change, and don't just follow the herd, because that's what we've always done. Because if we did that, then where would we be as a society, right? We wouldn't ever grow, we would never go anywhere. So
I think just before we move on from Freud, I think he was ahead of his time. I know some of his stuff is controversial and maybe outdated now, but he had lots of conviction and he stood by his word, which I respect. And as you've rightly pointed out, Ryan, not all of it's spot on, not all of it makes sense for people. And again, I think he was a little bit ahead of his time. But then I think he's been a catalyst for so many people in terms of challenging different ideas and, societal beliefs. And I think you need that courage to state your own case and project how you perceive the world. And he did that without a doubt.
Yeah, cool. So I know I asked this before, but I didn't think I got the answer that I was looking for, so I might ask it again. Yeah. So did you have like that moment? Because I know for me, I had a moment where, I was ready to check out of this world, and I just had that click of, okay, I'm going to now do this. Did you have like that defining moment where it was like, okay?
The quote about Liverpool being the centre of the universe is on a plaque in Cavern Walks, where the Beatles come from. That's where I saw that quote. And that was the trigger point in terms of, okay, I like what this guy's saying about the city. Who is he? And I did my research and started reading stuff about dreams, memories, and reflections. Was the first Jungian book I read, and that really intrigued me. And that was when
So
I
what
found
age? What
psychology.
age was this?
17, 18.
Yeah.
And I was sort of a bit uncertain about which way I was going to go, and then that really resonated with me, and so I just began to dig deeper and dig deeper, and then I thought, right, I'd want to pursue this as a profession. And again, the university has a really great psychology department, so again, another little bit of fortune, serendipity.
Yeah, I like to call it grace. You know what I mean?
Lovely, I like that.
Yeah. So it's funny when you're ready to make a change or ready to go in a direction, life or the universe will something will show up, and you got to like really take that omen or whatever you want to call it to follow whatever that is, and to have the faith that it's going to work out, because that's
really lovely, Ryan, and that fits into sort of my approach to psychology, that if you're not in good mental health, then you miss that serendipitous moment, and by having that blunted effect emotionally, you miss those triggers and those cues that maybe will help you move forwards,
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been very popularized now, like the law of attraction, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that whole depends on what you're thinking about will then draw into your consciousness or draw into your world of what it is that you're putting out there. So it's very important for us to look after our mental health and put us in a state where we do catch the aim and we're receptive to the things.
Signs.
Yeah, 100%.
I love that,
yeah.
So from adversity comes something great, and the trigger from Jung was a big thing, and I'm still a huge Jungian in terms of he coined the phrase of collective unconscious, and I think
I wrote that one down because I want to touch on that with you. I thought that was cool.
It's great, and people often ask about the universe, and there's lots of stuff about The Secret's a movie or a book about what you put out there comes back. Or I'm really very comfortable with people's different belief systems. But for me, the fact that we go through, life and loss and love, and I like to believe that there's a connection there, and Jung coined that to be collective unconscious just by being human and going through those emotions of love and loss and grief and difficulties and great times in our lives. That is the connection between us humans, and that collective unconscious needs to be addressed, and we need to drive that, because that's the connection for me between everybody.
Yeah, and I like that, and I like to bring people onto the podcast that have been through adversity in their life, because then the listeners out there that are going through similar things or whatever, because a lot of times we get stuck in our head, right? When we're going through something, we're like, this only happens to me, or, like, why isn't anyone else not going through this type of stuff? But
they are.
But they are, that's right. Yeah. And I remember I went to a Tony Robbins event once.
Yeah, it was good.
And I was there and we were talking, and he was like, oh, let's everyone stand up, right? And, you basically got to say what your biggest fear is or what it is, and 9 out of 10 people were like, I'm not enough, or I'm not, you know what I mean? And I just found it really interesting that we've all got that kind of, that side of ourselves, that negative thinking of, oh, I'm not enough, or I'm not good enough, and it just goes to show that while a lot of us think that, sometimes we think we're the only ones that feel that way or think that way, but everyone's got that that rumination or that negative thinking about themselves, and that's something that I like to try and work on, is to work on that positive self-talk and work on, what it is that you're saying to yourself every day, because, 70% of the conversations you have is between you and you, right? Yeah. So if that's the case, then, would you talk to your best friend or anyone on the street the way that you're talking to yourself right now? Yeah. And if you wouldn't, then why, why are you talking to yourself?
That's come to the before recently. I mean, Jordan Peterson touches on that. One of his 12 rules for life is about treating yourself as though you were looking after somebody who was struggling. You know? And I like that you've touched on that self-communication, Ryan, because it's hugely important. And we'll look further on at neuroplasticity, but that conversation that one has with oneself, we tend to be awfully hard on the individual. And I like that sort of approach that you should relate to yourself as though you're caring for yourself, and that individual's fragile. And I think we're all a little guilty of being too hard with ourselves. You know?
And there's a really cool a technique, I would want to call it a technique, whereas if you did something what you classify as being wrong, or you feel like some shame or guilt about it, like go close your eyes, picture yourself as like a 5-year-old kid or whatever, and then what would you then tell that kid if they'd done that thing that you'd done? Like, how would you then approach them and talk to them? You would be very loving and nurturing, and that's okay, like, you know what I mean? But we don't do that to ourselves, right? But we should be. So that's a really powerful technique that I've learned is, go back to how you'd treat a child if they did that same thing, and, talk to yourself in that type of manner instead of the manner that we do.
That approach, I sort of try and educate my clients to think in those terms, and to be more compassionate with the self. And we talk about passion and drive and motivation and achievement. Maybe it's not part of it's passion. I like that drive. I like for people to push themselves, but I think we sort of neglect that compassion side and that empathy side, particularly when we relate to ourselves. So it's a lovely point.
Yeah. So this is like the $1 million question. In your opinion, why do you think that is? Why do you think that we generally go straight to the negative and beat ourselves down? And what is it that is happening, or what is it from our past, or is it the collective consciousness? Because that's what we've always done. Is that why we kind of do that, or what's your opinion on that?
I think some of the values of society about and the way we're advertised to.
Might speed this up. Yeah.
Is that better? The way we're sort of we relate to society. I think there's that almost hard edge in terms of having to achieve and somehow being lacking if you don't have what society deems to be a successful life. And then the individual feels as though something is lacking, and they get caught in that negative mindset and that automatic negative thought loop that I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy because I don't have A, B, and C. And the whole advertising industry is driven by, more and more and more. And
if you don't have this, then you won't feel this, or
you're
100%.
And basically, if we get into psychology, that's about social comparison, whereby, one naturally compares oneself with others. And I think advertising and consumerism plays on that
100%
very negatively. And as you've rightly pointed out, that somehow if you don't have such and such, then you're not worthy or you're lacking. And that's part of the problem with advertising and consumerism, that it never stops. It's more and more. And so when you do attain whatever you wanted, we get bored of that. You go and buy the Porsche, or you go and buy this, or you have the best looking partner, or you have X amount of dollars in the bank, and somehow that's going to make your life fulfilled. And
it's a bottomless pit, but isn't it?
It never stops, and it's just it's a self-serving sort of industry whereby it's never enough.
Yeah, so I got a good mate of mine. He's actually come on this podcast, and he's really good at marketing, right? And he'll openly admit, like, my job is to try and find and tell people that they aren't enough, and And the way to make them feel enough is to have whatever it is that he's selling. Yeah. And so, advertising is all about trying to make you feel like you're not enough, and we do that enough already. So we don't need to bombard it every day. Like right now, you pick up your phone, advertise. We've got advertising everywhere you look. It's there. You know what I mean? And it's always telling you that you need this product to then feel this certain way. But what happens when we buy that product? We don't get the feeling that they promised, right? Yeah, and I guess my other thought around that is there's a lot of talk about parenting and weighted parenting, and a lot of people say negative self-talk can come from like parents from always trying to tell you what to do, or and they're not doing it on purpose. They're not trying to feel you're not enough, but they're just trying to help you grow as a human. But they can tend to do that in a way that can seem like to a child that you need to do this or you need to do that to be more to be so parents inadvertently or not meaning to are putting that into kids' heads. And right, and as I'm sure that's when we develop our subconscious, right? The first 6 years, that's when we've got no filter, so everything goes straight in. So it's very important for any parents out there to really to be able to control your emotional state and control the way that you're speaking, because then that will then reflect into the child.
Yeah, most definitely. And as you've rightly pointed out, I think no parent intends to undermine the child, and it always comes from a decent place. But when they're then shaped by society, and you touched on, give me the individual till the 6 or 7, or in child psychology, you sort of look at 10 or 11. Those years are so very important. And if we set the individual up negatively and to be hard and self-deprecating in those formative years, then it's difficult then to go back and undo that negative impact or that transference, we call it, whereby the parent projects onto the child. One of the lines is, give me the individual till they're 7, and I'll give you the adult. So I like the fact that you've raised that, because those years are so. And again, it's not about running down parents. They're all coming from the right place.
And that's why
where do their beliefs come from, and their value systems and generational differences. One of the things in therapy I look at is, do we still, do those beliefs and those values still hold true? Because I can go back. It's only 60 years post World War. I don't want to digress too much, but there was a whole generation of males who came back, at the end of the Second World War in 1945, who were traumatized with PTSD. Now we're more conscious of what's going on for individuals who've been in conflict. However, back 60 odd years ago, those blokes basically were sort of kicked onto Civvy Street and told to just cope with life, having been through all this trauma, and they self-medicated, lots of them. They were angry, they were traumatized, they were depressed, and there wasn't the support there. And then they had a generation of children who were then shaped by their trauma, basically. And now we're sort of a couple of generations further down, and people are more cognizant about mental health and mental well-being, and without making it a gender issue, guys particularly, have been drilled, educated, not to really reach out, and somehow that was a weakness, and consequently that was bottled up, and the spillover was such that it was passed on to the next generation. And I think we are now beginning to try and break that mold. I think
100%.
That's happening, but I think to have some insight as to why that's come about is very important.
Yeah, I know. With my parents, so my dad was not someone that really talked about his feelings or anything like that, and I can remember never ever seeing my dad like emotional or anything like when I was younger, And yeah, I suppose as a child you're a sponge, right? You take that in, you're like, well, that's how you deal with stuff. Yeah, and fast forward to now, like, my dad's a completely different person. Like, he's definitely more in touch with his emotions and stuff now. But I never seen that, right, as a kid, and whether that was on purpose from him or not, I'm not too sure. But yeah, I think it.
Well, he probably inherited that from his.
And that's the
father.
thing, and
you're talking about attachment theory at the moment. That that's the concept within psychology.
Yeah.
When you're young, you mimic, you copy, and if the individual you're sort of trying to learn from has struggled or has been damaged from their childhood or their parents' experience in life, then it just perpetuates. And I think it's on us now to sort of break that cycle, and it is happening. And I think men are encouraged to be emotionally intelligent. I think that's great, and to express what's going on for them. Whereas probably my grandfather's generation were told to basically, suck it up and that's how it is, and harden up. That's what happens, which can be very detrimental for individuals.
And I think it's important. It's funny because I just listened to a book this morning called Letting Go from David Hawkins. I don't know if you know David Hawkins. Yeah. And he talks about this. And when we talk about opening up about emotions and talking, that doesn't mean that we go around expressing everything and fall into that victim mentality and, poor me. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about opening up. It's, right, I think that's, some people go too far the other way. Then they try and open up about everything, but then they turn that into constant talking about their issues and constant talking about, and that's not really helping anyone,
it's
right?
Almost the pendulum swung too far the other way.
Yeah. And, that just perpetuates into more victim mentality and poor me, because then they bottle it up for so long, and then when they start, they kind of then can't stop. And like that might be great for the first part to just let it all out. That's great, but then to move on as well, and to not let that hold you back, and not let that be your story now. As well, poor me, I've been through all this, and that's the end.
My narrative.
That's
now,
right.
I'm stuck there again.
Yeah, so we need to try and be aware and conscious of that. So don't swing too far in the other direction. And you brought up attachment theory. So if I'm writing stuff down, I'm trying to remind myself to bring stuff up. Yeah, so I brought a good friend of mine, Angelique Joy, and she's really big on attachment theory. And I've had to look into a lot of attachment stuff through my upbringing and stuff like that. And I think when you touched on like a child, or it takes on, and then that was because their parents and then their parents. And I know when I brought up with my mum a few years ago, I sat her down and said, look, this is what I was feeling as a child from you, and this is what sort of, and I wasn't saying it as having a go at her. I was saying it as, and she got real defensive straight away. Well, you got nothing like what I got, like that's, what I mean? And then I was like, well, I'm not talking about what you got. I'm talking about what happened between us. And, I know she went through stuff and all that, and we all do, but it's our job as an individual to break them chains, to not then put it on to the next generation. So for a big driver of me to try and change who I am is because I don't want to then put that on to the next person. And if you do go and want to speak to your parents about it and stuff, and just be well aware that, they are probably feeling guilty as well for it, but our human nature is to get defensive and try and just spread the blame. And if that happens, then, I had the compassion to go, I understand, Mum, and I'm not blaming you, and, to try and, because that might be a conversation, like that helped me get it off my chest, and but at the same time, I suppose it helps them to then, I suppose, accept that that's what happened, but then they can then start their journey on working through, because they'll feel guilt from that, right? They'll feel pain from that. And having them tough conversations is something that I like promoting, is having them tough conversations, because generally two people heal from it. It's not just a person that's...
Lovely. You've touched on a couple of great points there, Ryan, about people's fear about
Just move this.
sort of lifting the lid in terms of opening a can of worms. You don't want, and then the blame game. So people then feel that you're pointing a finger and somehow you're projecting onto your parents for all your faults.
Yeah, and that's not what it's
that's
about.
Not what you're doing.
No. And what's the
shy
age-old saying about pointing at someone?
Yeah,
You got
there's
three fingers pointing back at
pointing
yourself.
back at
Yeah.
you. And we live in a culture of blame. And, you know, that's a societal thing. It's not just about the child and the parent. But yeah, in terms of attachment theory, we mimic. That's what children do. They sort of relate to a parent or an uncle or an aunt or whomever it is, a close family member, and they say, okay, well, I like the way you are and who you are, and then they mimic that behaviour. But if everyone's traumatised around them, then that's just trauma perpetuates itself.
Yeah, a lot of times you either copy or it's your body using its self-defense mechanisms to cope with, because they don't have the tools and strategies to cope with, you know, with the chaotic parents, and then they learn a strategy that may have helped them at the time, but when we try and use them same coping mechanisms now, it doesn't work, right? But we don't know any better because that's in the first 6, or when you're developing then, you know, and it's very hard to, I'm not going to say it's very hard, it's, I don't like using that word, but it is something that, you know, takes a bit of time and something you got to create some awareness around.
And also to challenge the belief systems and the values that your parents had. Is that somehow, does the individual see that as disrespectful? And back to opening the can of worms, that people are frightened, or somehow it's an insult to challenge that belief system, which mightn't be, you know, it mightn't be pertinent for the here and now. The beliefs are outdated. One of the things I work on is to the challenging of beliefs, but that can trigger lots of fear and anxiety. That, okay, well, if I question everything that I've learned, where does that then leave me?
Yeah, who am I?
Who am I?
Yeah, the whole
identity.
Yeah, 100%.
And so people will shy away from that out of, they don't want to disrespect the parents or the grandparents, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety about, right, well, if I try and deconstruct my beliefs and my values, where then does that leave me? So better the devil you know.
The identity crisis. Yeah.
People just stick with.
It's easier. It's easier to just stay where you are, right?
Point, mate. It's easier just to continue rather than to put the work in and challenge and develop your own set of beliefs.
Yeah, and so I was fortunate enough to do a lot of work around like framing and stuff as well. So I tried to deliver it in a way that it was coming from love. It wasn't coming from I'm attacking you. And because I really thought about how I was going to bring this up, you know what I mean? Sure. And because I brought it up in that way, if I would have brought it up any other way, it just would have been like chaos, right? But then I noticed she did swing from, I'm sorry, to then, it's not my fault, to then, so she kind of like teetered on both things, you know what I mean? Which was huge for my mum, because I know like that would be very difficult for her. So if you are looking to have any difficult conversation with anyone, start with, framing it in a way you're doing it out of love, not out of attack. That's because people automatically get defensive. People automatically put that shield up and go, well, you're attacking me, so I need to attack you now. You know what I mean?
Defenses go up and the walls go up. And well, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of both parties benefit and grow and develop from it. And ultimately you're moving on to new ground in terms of that communication, those channels being open. And even if it is a little difficult, the growth for both parties is worth it, you know.
And just know that if you do have a tough conversation with someone, doesn't matter with your parents or whatever, if they do come, if you do it correctly and do it from a place of love, even if they do go straight to defensiveness, you know that when they walk away from that, they will reflect on it and they will realize, you know what I mean? So even at the time it may seem like, well, that was a waste of time, I guarantee you it wasn't. I'm guaranteed they'll walk away and they will reflect on that and they'll go, hang on a minute. And they, even if they don't come back and say anything to you, you know that you've done the best that you can with what you did, and you did it for the right reason, so you don't have any anxiety or guilt around it because you didn't just go in there attacking or whatever. So
I think the approach is very important and how you frame it, and we'll touch on reframes and belief systems a little bit later, hopefully. But the reframe is massive, and that's a cornerstone of cognitive behavioural therapy, which I lean on quite heavily.
Yeah.
But we'll touch on that further down the line, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I know you talked about before, like trials and tribulations and stuff that sort of is very difficult, and a lot of us go straight to why me and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I've tried to train my thinking and my belief when something like this comes up, is I ask myself a few simple questions like, what is this trying to teach me? What am I going to benefit from this? Like, what am I learning? And what character am I building from this challenge that I can then go forward? And I use this I've done a few talks at schools and stuff, and I like to say to the kids, life is like a video game, right? You got level 1, easy, right? Everyone goes through level 1, like, this is so easy. And that's like when you're a little kid, right? Yep. And what happens in level 2, there might be one little obstacle, and you're like, oh, okay, I've got to try and navigate this obstacle. And then when you learn the skill it is to then do the obstacle, then, okay, you go to the next level. And then so life is very similar. You come up to a challenge, and instead of going, oh, poor me, you go, oh, what skill I need to learn to get over this thing? And then, you may come up to like the boss of that level, and then this is something hits you hard, right? You're like, shit. And instead of going back to, oh, that poor me, okay, if I can now do this, and kids will sit there all day and play that video game and try and beat that one level all day, and they don't care if they fail 100 million, But in life, when something comes up, they don't have. So I think if you think of it as a way of growing and learning and getting to level up in life, and I think that really resonated with the kids, and I love bringing that one up. And that's
excellent stuff, And I think that's where solutions lie with the children, and equipping them to deal with life's knocks. And a big thing in today's society at the moment is resilience. I lean towards a different concept called anti-fragility. I don't know, Ryan, if you know about being...
I have heard of that before.
Anti-fragile.
Yeah.
This is about... So if you look at resilience, which is great, and that's a great mindset to tough it out and be able to keep moving forward, and you can bring in concepts like failing forward, and you are going to be buffeted by life. That's what's going to happen, and it's important that you learn from it. But in terms of anti-fragile, how can you be better for having been through that adversity?
That's powerful.
And that's very powerful. If you can get into that, resilience is lovely. I like that approach, but we sort of white knuckle a little bit and just try and get through it and not to break. My approach would be more to look back and draw from that how you've improved for having been through those difficulties or those traumas in life,
Yeah, instead of just gritting it out and gritting your teeth.
Which is great, but then how can you draw down from that in terms
thrive instead of survive?
Why has it made you better? And I think when people go through their life's trials and tribulations, which we all go through, touching back on a collective unconscious, we all go through loss, we all go through grief.
It's part of life, right?
That's the part of the human condition. However, how can you learn? How has that improved who you are as a human being? And I think that's the next step forward in terms of psychology, and anti-fragility is massive.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favourite people in the world is Dr. Demartini, in the Demartini method, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. Is write down every positive thing that's happened from that experience, and if you do it enough through your neuroplasticity and your neural networks, that you'll eventually get to a point where you'll see the equal amount of positives and negatives in any situation, and then it neutralizes itself, and you go, well, was it really a bad experience, or was it, you know what I mean? If there's equal amounts of positive and negative.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really powerful. So I guess I'll ask you now, is there something, a go-to technique or something that that you predominantly would tell someone that is going through something that's quite traumatic?
Okay, I think we touched on a couple of points in terms of cognitive behavioural therapy and the reframe and the challenge of, is this true? I think people, if we use a basic example of I'm not worthy, to be able to, that's the cornerstone of cognitive behavioural therapy, to challenge, is that honest and true, and is it real for the individual? You know, maybe someone thinks they're not successful, and then to challenge that in terms of, well, you're successful at living, you've been living
Still here
for 40 years or 50 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the ability, as you've rightly pointed out, to see the positives. And I don't want to be too glib and cliche about the glass being half full or half empty, but I think philosophically and psychologically that's a cornerstone to work on and to challenge. But yeah, there are different techniques in terms of back to cognitive behavioral therapy, or ANTS we call them, automatic negative thinking, and you touched on a concept called neuroplasticity, that you neurons that fire together wire together, and so you're creating particular pathways within your own psychology. And you know, you will have heard, you are what you eat. No, you are what you do. No, you are what you think. And if that thought process is constantly negative, a good, maybe not a metaphor, but if you look at something like obsessive compulsive disorder, and you have a checking component whereby you have to check the ovens off, or the door's closed, or the lights are off, or you leave the house and you're not sure, that in that moment, that checking is used as a distraction. OCD is an anxiety disorder, and the individual thinks by going through that ritual and that routine, they're reducing their anxiety, or the checking, or the hygiene is another big one. They're going through the hand washing is a distraction from the anxiety, but really what's happening is you're reinforcing those neural networks, and you're entrenching that cognitive pathway always. And in the moment, the individual thinks there's some relief, but in actual fact, what you're doing is reinforcing those connections, and reinforcing that automatic negative thinking process.
Yeah, I've always seen OCD, or people with OCD, as trying to control, to have that certainty in their life, because there's so much uncertainty. So for me, if I talk to someone with OCD, I'm like, well, where's the chaos in your life? Where's there so much uncertainty that you're now trying to create certainty? This is what I love about habits and routines. If you create a stable habit, and wake up, go to the gym, and positive habits, then you've got that certainty already, and then you may not need to get it through other means. You know what I mean?
Most definitely, yeah. I mean, there's an interesting concept. We probably don't have time to look at it now. Is addiction a form of OCD? You know, that's a big concept in terms of that repetitive, ritualistic behaviour. I think habituation and addictive. I think there are some very healthy addictive behaviours, and people would argue with me that any addiction is negative. I think we're creatures of habit.
I agree with that to a certain extent. Like, I'd much rather you addicted to the gym as opposed to addicted to drugs, right?
The thing about the addictive process is that so if we look at sort of exercise addiction, how are you if you get injured and you can't perform that exercise routine? Does that then somehow leave you more vulnerable because you're dependent on it?
And I think I've done that myself, 100%.
Yeah, so again, there aren't any definitive answers.
No.
Specifically, I think it's bespoke to the individual and how they are mindful. That's a very in vogue concept. I think that presentism in terms of being focused on how you're thinking, and we'll explore that a little later. But yeah, you're right. Good habits, and this is what we do when we get up, and we drink our water, and we go and do some exercise, and then we have some structure and balance in terms of we work through the day, and then we socialise and have our interaction, our family time, and then our leisure time. Whether that be gaming you've mentioned, and that's okay as long as that's not the be all and end all of your behaviour pattern.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you touched on before about having good people in your life, which really helped. And I think that's so important. I think community is massive, and something that we lack is that community, that connection, because we were so used to growing up in tribes, and we had like parents and grandparents, and we're so isolated today, especially like post-pandemic, people working from home and not having the right people around you. So I think that's really awesome. So if you could explain, like, the connection and having the right people, like how much that changed your trajectory of your life.
Yeah, most definitely. Sort of coming from quite a deprived area, I think there were lots of damaged individuals, and you saw that their children then sort of adopted the same behaviour patterns, or the sort of same trauma. It was generational trauma, it was generational addiction, it was generational unemployment, or sort of lack of meaning and purpose in the individual's life. And you can see it being passed from the adult to the child, from the parent to the child. And I sort of attribute my ability to get out in the world, to having a safe and nurturing, loving environment with the right motivation and the right encouragement to. But if the child sees the parent behaving, look at generational addiction. We now know that it's huge. The adult copes with the difficulties in life through alcohol or drug abuse. Then that's the coping mechanism that the child inherits, and this is how my mum or dad dealt with a particular way, particular issues in a particular way, and then that's reinforced because that's what they do, then that's what I do. And I think it's a very pertinent point that for me, I had some cool people around me, Ryan, and yeah, there was lots of dysfunction living on a housing estate. However, the primary caregivers in my life were pretty cool and together and decent, and they instill a nice set of values and beliefs, and that was monstrous. So in terms of looking to bring our children up in a healthy and positive manner, I think that really needs to be addressed. And anything sort of that's insightful or nurturing needs to be promoted.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I've come across a lot of people that have been through a lot as children, and they've got siblings that were obviously in the same situation, and yet I find one of them really made the change and used that as a determination or motivation to then get out of it, and and then you see the other one use that as a victim mentality to then keep going down that same path. Right. So one thing I haven't got a straight answer from anyone, I don't know if I ever will, so I'm going to ask you, what do you think it is in that person that made that change? Like, what is it that made them different to then go on a better path as opposed to not? Like, what is it in a human that, is there any sort of studies or any sort of evidence to say that a certain characteristic or a certain, do you understand what I'm trying to?
Yeah, okay. So if you look at siblings, the communication from the parents, they're different individuals at a particular time, right? So the big philosophical concept, which you will have heard of, is it nurture or is it nature? Yeah. Now we've developed into a concept called epigenetics. So the environment is triggering your genes. So it is both a physiological, a genetic, and an environmental.
Joe Dispenza's doing a lot of great work in that at the moment.
Dispenza's brilliant stuff, and epigenetics is fantastic. So it's not black and white and definitive that you are genetically predispositioned to such and such, although there's lots of research going on about alcoholism and identifying genes that predispose the individual to alcoholism. Why is it that I can enjoy a drink and stop, and maybe somebody else can't stop? And
there's a lot of evidence with addiction. I think Gamma May talks about and trauma. Like trauma, I think 7,000 more times to have an addiction from trauma, right. Which is absolutely insane. When you think of that, that's absolutely
big numbers, Ryan. They're really big numbers, and so I think it's bifold. I think that when you talk about siblings, particularly, is a very valid point. But maybe the communication from the parent was different between the 5-year-old or the 10-year-old, yeah, and how that is then the message that's being projected is processed by the individual, and I think that one size fits all is a problem within society.
Oh, massively.
And I don't want to get too much into it's all individualistic because we are a collective. We're a community, and
you've got to have that happy medium, right? You can't go too.
And also the relationship with other important figures within the community and within the family, and how that relationship happens. And you touched on it. It takes a village to raise the kids. And we need that sense of unity that I think is being lost, and that it's all about nuclear rather than extended families now. And I think I read somewhere a couple of days ago that the individual in Western society will spend 17 years on their phone. So I don't want to be boo-hooing technology, because we'd be lost without our phones.
Yeah.
However, I think it's that the pendulum we spoke about earlier, that we've gone to an extreme, and the whole concept is to keep you flicking through your phone devices. And I'll be controversial here for you, Ryan, but
I love controversial. Let's go.
I honestly believe that within the next 10, 20 years, we will look back on this time and say, what were we doing giving our children these devices?
No, I don't think that's controversial at all.
Mate, I think that's coming.
Yeah.
And I think that, and you don't want to be doom and gloom and it's ruining society, but it is.
Yeah, I read something. I think I listened to it, and it was someone talking, and he was adamant that he would not give a child under the age of 6 a device, like under no circumstances is that bad.
And I think you mentioned earlier about effort, and the best things take effort and commitment, and I think that people are so overwhelmed, and we'll touch on post-COVID hopefully in a minute, but the TV and the devices, the phones, are now rearing the kids. And the parents, and this is not a criticism, although it could be deemed a criticism, is that it's easy. It's easy to give the child a distraction and keep them entertained, rather than, and because people are time poor and they're stressed in themselves, so they just press the button. The kid is entertained for multiple hours.
Yeah.
But what sort of input are we giving the children?
Yeah, and then so this reinforces the lack of community around like a family, because if you're a struggling single mom with 2 jobs, like you don't have the energy to with the kids, like, so you have to get whereas back in when they had the community and like tribes or whatever, like if you had a tough day, grandparents are there, everyone's there to look at, and then they can then have their part in it. So the grandparents or the community was the iPad or the phone. That was their way of getting away and having some time to themselves, and you know what I mean? Whereas now they don't have that, so the only way they can do it is using
the device. And you can look at things like obesity and nutrition, And for people who are time poor or financially challenged, then fast food's easier. You know, I've worked in deprived areas, Ryan, and tried to encourage individuals, whether it be the mother or the father, to try and get a decent nutritional balanced diet for the kids. But it's easier for them to go to McDonald's
100%.
because they're not in the right mindset to cook and go to the supermarket. And I've actually worked with people and taken them to the supermarket to buy, because they might be living hand to mouth. Financially, there might be an issue, and what we've done is try and get the larder full of half-decent food rather than the default setting to go to some fast food chains. I mean, you look at the demographics about fast food, and they're much, much more prevalent in deprived areas, you know, and $1 for a burger or whatever it is for a mum, as you rightly point out, who's stressed within themselves. They just want to do the right thing and give the kids something to eat because the kid is hungry. So the default setting is they go to you know, a fast food joint, whatever that be. Yeah. Then what happens is the child is nutritionally deprived. Yeah. The child, then we have a massive obesity problem globally, whether you're here or the UK, it doesn't matter, right? So then what happens? Then they develop diseases. Medicine per se, and I'll be very controversial now, is based on a disease model. You look at something like diabetes, it's reversible. Yeah. Once that pancreatic breakdown happens, then you've got people on insulin for life. Repeat business.
We're very much on the same page about a lot of things like this.
It's a disease model. It's not about curative.
No.
They want you to, the people who produce insulin, the people who produce antidepressants want you to come back and repeat that script. They don't want you to move away from it. And I might get shot down for this because there is a time and place for medication.
You won't hear.
I won't boo-hoo it, you know. However, think about what's happening. It's all about repeat business. And that's how it's trillions and trillions of dollars.
And I was very shocked because I know when I went to, I think we spoke about this before, is when I went to a psychologist, the first thing they said was, here's a pill. Yeah. They didn't ask me what my sleep was like, what was my diet like. They didn't ask me about, you know what I mean? So I think nutrition and food is so talked about and underrated when it comes to mental health. It's just, it blows my mind, actually.
People will know of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. We won't get into neurophysiology at the moment. However, most of your serotonin is actually produced in your gut.
Yeah.
And, you know, if that gut culture, I mean, it's not really my forte, but I'm interested, and I've done a little bit of research.
Me too, yeah.
If that biodome isn't healthy and functional, then the ramifications are then depression, anxiety disorder, you know, anger.
It's kind of like the simple concept of a car. Like, you put shit fuel in your car and you
blow up. Yeah.
Well, it's not going to run very right. You know what I mean? So how are you expecting this, which is way more complex, to run, you know, smoothly and run sweetly if you're not putting the right fuel in there?
Yeah. So it's about, and back to the anti-fragility, I think that is a great concept. It's eclectic. You know, there's a concept within psychology called Gestalt. Right? German guy spoke about how the separate parts create the whole. He said that the individual parts are different to the whole and how that's put together. So it's diet, it's exercise, it's psychology, it's communication, it's acceptance moving forward, it's learning, you know. There isn't, you can't just focus on one aspect. It's about...
No, that's that collective consciousness part too. And I read something the other day and it really blew my mind. They're now saying that most studies that they've done around disease and all that, because they've pulled the cell out of the human body and tested it by itself, you're not going to get an accurate test because it's going to react different by itself as opposed to being... So they're saying most of their studies now, they got to go back and start again because they're like, well, it's not going to react the same because it's in a different environment and it's not, it hasn't been affected by all the other cells around it. So, and I was like, wow, that's, you know what I mean? It's
Well, I like the metaphor of the sports team. You know, if you look at something, I'm a soccer fan, but if you look at something like cricket, you have your bowlers, one aspect. You have your batters, you have your fielders, you have your wicketkeeper.
Do you think someone from England can talk about cricket, mate, or no?
Oh, right. I believe you have Mr. Adam Hollyoak, who's a good mate of mine, and yeah, so I try and veer away from cricket and rugby.
Yeah.
Although I'm a big sports fan.
Yeah.
When it comes to sport, there is only one sport. That's soccer. And as a huge Liverpool fan, I've been very.
Oh, you called it soccer, not football. Okay,
well,
you're now Aussie.
I learned over years in being in the States that rather than generate that confusion, I'll sort of abdicate because it is football.
Yeah.
But we'll use the soccer term. But yeah, again, you break that down then. The goalkeeper, the strikers, the midfield, the defence. You need all of those aspects. And it's a lovely metaphor for the individual.
Definitely.
You know?
How many teams have you seen on paper don't look that good, but they gel that well that they beat everyone? And so individually, you got 6 stars on this side, but they don't gel, and they can't even beat a side that has nowhere near the talent, but they've got that cohesion and that synergy to work together to get to the goal, whatever it is.
But that's the Gestalt. I don't think I really explained that well, but Gestalt said the whole is other. He actually, it's misquoted, but the popular quote is, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. He actually didn't say that. He said the whole is other than the sum of the parts, but it's how you put that together. BMW used it in a brilliant ad campaign 20 years ago, and they had the wheels and the chassis and the cabin and the shell and then the engine, and it was all laid out, you know, on the floor, and then they put it together in the completed vehicle. Brilliant ad campaign, but that was the concept that they were using. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and that's what you've touched on in terms of a sporting metaphor. That you need the batters and the bowlers, and it's different. They have their role, and I think if you can apply that to the individual, then that's how you create a positive and healthy, a meaningful life. You know?
Yeah.
And we haven't even touched on meaning. What is the purpose? I know that was sort of
Victor Frank.
Yeah, Victor Frankl. So if people know about Man's Search for Meaning.
Great book. Anyone looking for a book, I
brilliant.
highly recommend that book.
If I give it a quick summary, very unfortunate. He was a psychiatrist, and this was in the Holocaust, and he was taken to Auschwitz with his wife and his children, and very sadly, tragically, they were, as soon as they arrived, they were sent to the gas chamber. But he didn't know that, and he conducted therapy in Auschwitz. Amazing guy, and some of the things he came to were very significant about meaning and purpose and the will to live and what drives, you know. And I'm also very fascinated by where's the motivation. You know, we'll touch on hopefully about locus of control. Locus just meaning where is the location of control? Is that within you, or is it predetermined by, you know, life's experience or the events that happen, you know? And I think it's very important. I think a bit of both, a little bit like epigenetics. I think some of it, you know, bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. And, you know, we can touch on acceptance therapy, but yeah, it's how you put it together. You know, there isn't one size fits all. It has to be for the individual and what's it. You know, some people are great at being disciplined with the physical exercise. Some people are great at nurturing the mind, or you know, sort of that knowledge and development, you know, of the brain. And they might be great at that, and reading and sourcing great forms of different sources of information. And another individual might be great at running marathons, you know. But I think you need a blend of different disciplines, different aspects of life, and it's how you. And that's one of the things I'm really passionate about. Is as an individual, Ryan, you put yourself together. You feed yourself. If you keep feeding yourself with the negative, you know, if you keep, you know, you
input equals output, right?
Brilliant, mate. Yeah, you know, and And I honestly believe that it's tabula rasa. It's a blank canvas, and I think it doesn't matter what age you are. You touched on it off air just before about you know how what you do. You are, you create yourself and you pursue those particular activities, and that's what creates the individual. I sort of wave it there. I've digressed a little bit. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'll just write down because you've touched on it before about the individuality and how everyone has been through these different experiences, and it's very hard to give a one size fits all. And I think a lot of programs and a lot of people that are out there trying to do the right thing and try to help people, but I don't like this. I've got I've got this program that's one size that fits all, and I sometimes I think you need to dig a bit deeper and have a conversation with someone, because when people come to me, like I do have a set core things that will help everyone, which is great, but to deliver that to an individual, you kind of need to give it the context that suits that person through to whatever it is that they've kind of been through. So it's kind of like, I think with exercise, like you wouldn't go to someone at the gym and go and give the same program to someone that's overweight, to someone that's a marathon runner, to someone that's, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
It's just not going to work. I mean, you need to tweak things and to make, yes, exercise as a whole is awesome. That's the program, but you need to be then be able to, dissect
Tailor
that
for the individual.
Yes, 100%.
And age comes into it,
Not young fellas like us, surely.
or individuals find themselves, maybe they've been traumatized and they haven't nurtured themselves, and they haven't, and we touched on that about deprived areas and nutrition and dietary, input. So you're quite right. The exercise regime for that individual who might be carrying too much weight or hasn't trained for a long time, or
injuries or anything,
is going to be or the time poor,
Yeah, definitely.
compared to the marathon runner or the elite athlete. It's different. But I also think you can offer up particular strategies that will help almost everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also think, that support and that collective and community is massive. For me, I'd rather train with a buddy or be in that environment. I'm not that self-disciplined at times, and so actually being out there on my own, going for a run or whatever it is, but I can recognise that maybe that is a bit, not a weakness, but I need to approach that differently.
Yeah.
For me, that community and having a banter and a laugh and humour is
Yeah,
massive.
especially when you're starting off with something too, you know what I mean? Like, if you're well trained at anything, you can then go and do it by yourself. But at the start, when you're trying to make the changes and become whatever it is, like, you need that community, right? You need that sort of a bit of a push, and until your weakness or something you need help with, then can become a strength, and then you don't need that type of help before, which is...
Well, the Nietzsche comment, isn't it? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. So I suppose we'll start talking about some strategies or some tools or what is it that you use. And I've wrote something down here, so I want to get your opinion on it. I haven't even asked you this yet, but there's a lot of studies going on now with very controversial, like with psilocybin and with ketamine and stuff like that. What is your thoughts on incorporating stuff like that into psychology and helping people?
I'm an advocate. I actually, and hopefully we'll explore this a little bit further about been involved in transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is
I've got that written down too. So yeah,
CNS.
let's go on to that.
Yeah, but it's a new innovative program whereby we stimulate a particular region of the brain that we know is a hotspot, your left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. On that note, that sounds very technical, Ryan. And
you need to dumb it down for people like me.
One of my intentions when I embarked on this journey that is psychology was to debunk, or not dumb down, but reframe the terminology. Because when I started some 25 years ago, if you mentioned paranoid schizophrenia to an individual, or obsessive compulsive disorder, or clinical depression, people would automatically shut down because they're a little bit frightened of the terminology. And one of the things that I've wanted to challenge over the past, quarter of a century is to break that down, so people don't go, oh my God, I don't understand, that's really heavy technical terminology. How do we bring people in so they can understand the concepts?
Definitely, that's one thing I feel like I do quite well.
Yeah,
is,
you do, yeah.
Is I break things down to be that simple that everyone understands.
And to look at difficult concepts as well.
Yeah.
But not to generate that fear and that anxiety with the individual, whereby, and it sort of echoes what you were saying about the conversation you had with your mum. Most people will be really frightened and shy away from that because they don't know upset, or they don't know how to handle it. So that's lovely that you're trying to formulate an approach whereby these big issues can be addressed. So back to the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. It's just a particular hotspot, a region in the brain. It's not anatomical. We know that this region is very active in glucose, oxygen, blood transference, yeah? And the stimulation thereof helps people with clinical depression, chronic disorders, but also there's a brain hack aspect to it. So I've been involved in this for about 18 months. I'm not going to get into it too much at the moment because I want to answer your question about psilocybin and ketamine without divulging too much. There is a backstory with me in terms of psychotropic drugs, not for a long time, but I have experienced it. And
yeah, I have. And I've had one of my most, I suppose,
revelation.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean,
I'm an advocate for it as well. That's why I thought I'd ask what you're.
I'm a big advocate, mate, and I think that it's been demonized. I think if people know about, and I really have to be careful that I'm not promoting drug abuse here or drug use so much. I think in the right setting, in the right context, sort of MDMA with ecstasy comes about through a therapeutic process. That's how it comes to society and to the mainstream, if you like. It was about allowing people to be more receptive through whatever tool. You can talk about psychotherapy, which I'm very much into, and a talking cure, but anything that can promote and advance and move people forward.
Some sort of healing, then
anything,
yeah.
It can be religion, it can be the universe, it can be yoga, it can be meditation, mindfulness, whatever it is. If it's helping, with the drug world, there's always that danger of abuse, and that's always going to be the case. But that doesn't mean you should throw, the baby out with the bathwater either. There are tools and places, and back to sort of mental health as a disease model. The data suggests that there is a time and place, and for some individuals, medication does work. But I don't think that that's a magic pill. So back to your question, yeah, I'm an advocate. If that works for you, great. I think it needs to be managed properly.
Definitely.
I think there's a danger the people who, I'm actually working with somebody at the moment who's got bipolar 1, and that was triggered through using LSD. So I have to give that counter argument as well.
Okay, yeah.
But I'm a big advocate. Whether it's ketamine, TMS, which I'm a big player in, or psilocybin. I mean, it's big up on the Gold Coast, and microdosing. It's not this sort of trippy experience, and I think that needs to be explored more because it's great and it's a fungus.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into natural remedies as such. However, it is out there. And it's always been there.
Yeah.
Without...
And, there's ancient tribes that have used this for healing for thousands of years. So how can you discount something that they've used for so long, and
Well, I'll be really
to throw that out there and say
you've got cannabinoid receptors in your brain that have been there through evolution. So again, got to be careful. I'm not promoting too much use of cannabis. However, those receptors are there. That isn't me making it up.
Yeah.
So that's been part of our evolution. And it's great we're on this topic, and I'm happy to get my teeth into it. I'm a bit hesitant, Ryan, because I know how things can be.
You sound like you like controversy, so I thought this would be a good one.
It can be very misconstrued. You've got to be careful what's on the record, but, five needs of human, right? The human condition. You need water. You need sustenance. You need shelter. You need sex. You need altered state of consciousness. Right, so our altered state of consciousness, if we go back, and I actually know through someone else that you're very into this about the limbic system, the reptilian brain. Go back only a couple of 100 years, you and I would have been receiving an adrenaline rush out of foraging and getting through the day in terms of survival. That's gone. I often use the example of, your food is now delivered, so the symbolism of you going out, even if it be to the supermarket to get the provisions, that's gone. So some of those needs
you kind of like lose respect like to the food kind of thing. You lose the meaning of it because it's just like, well, it's here.
It's delivered in whatever, now they've got a new way of selling us groceries by these sort of package. This is your week's supply, and it arrives on the door. There's no effort to go and source that food. I know
I like that.
It might sound a little bit flippant about going to the supermarket, but there's an effort. It's symbolic. You go, you get, you take home. There's a process to it. We could dig much, much deeper in terms of those. So back to the 5 needs. That last one about altered state of consciousness, where do we get that? We would have been driven by adrenaline to survive, and that would have generated an altered state of consciousness. That isn't even exploring sort of some of the plants, the ayahuasca, the psilocybin, the mushrooms, the cannabis, whatever it is. We've always had that anyway, but we would have had a survival hit, and having to survive, that's gone. I think lots, and our brain isn't as developed, and it isn't as modernistic as we actually think it is.
No.
Those they're needs that humans have to develop and to be, healthy. And they're all being just watered down, diminished. And who are we? Who do we want to be?
Yeah, and this brings me to a point, like we talk about happiness, and everyone's goal is to be happy. But your brain does not give a fuck if you're happy or right. Like, that's not its goal. It doesn't care. Its goal is survival, right? And happiness has got nothing to do with survival back then. But now with suicide and everything, it is a matter of survival for a lot of people, because if they're not happy, then they go down that route, which is quite tragic. So, but we haven't our brain hasn't caught up with society and the way society is. I think our brain, it takes a long time for evolution to change aspects of our body and our brain, but yet society's just gone like this. We can't catch up, so it's our job to then, happiness wouldn't have been a thing back in, thousands of years ago.
It would have just been survival.
Yeah, that's right.
Through the day and not being eaten by the
predators. That's a goal. That's a win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's all been sort of, as I said, watered down, the happiness trap. If you're not joyful and happy all the time, then somehow you're lacking. Rubbish, absolute rubbish, And I think that's a very valid point you raised, that lots of it was about survival. And that's what I was saying about an altered state of consciousness. You would have got that by just getting through the day and getting a feed and making sure your kids were fed. That would have given you that break from maybe the sort of mundane and the routine. Oh, great! There's an achievement. We've been successful in this aspect of the day. Yeah, and that would have given you a lift. It's gone. You know,
Yeah.
it's, everything's immediate gratification. That's one of my key
Yeah.
points.
Big time.
Delayed gratification, it's like, you know, you're in great shape, mate, but that took time. And the discipline and the effort and the input to go to the gym. You know, you're not going to look great and be super fit overnight.
Nah.
And so that ability to delay gratification is a huge missing part. The best things take time and effort, and I see it, and it isn't just a youth thing. I think it's a broad stroke across society per se. Everyone wants it yesterday, and the rubbish stuff you can get quickly. You know,
The thing with any substance takes time, takes effort.
you know, you've got to invest, and then that spills over to, you know, you invest in your physical well-being and your psychological well-being, and then you invest in your career or your work or your children or whatever it is. But it's a process, and that sounds a bit cliche, but it is a process, and I think we're losing that, Ryan. I really do, mate. I think that, you know, everyone wants it now.
Yeah. That's what the credit card's for, right?
That's what the
now.
credit card, yeah, and so everyone's in debt, and the system perpetuates that.
Well, they make money off it, you know,
That's
which
how
is
they
the
make
interest.
money,
That's,
Or you go and you get you know, which is better, mate? Is it a cheeseburger or is it a beautiful curry? I love my curries, or a beautifully put together meal, whatever it is. But the cheeseburger's there immediately.
Yeah.
Whereas
doesn't take
nothing.
That
Beautiful nutritional and the effort and the investment that you put into it, that all tastes better. You know. However, society is immediate.
Food made with love, isn't that the old saying? If it's
Exactly,
made with love,
mate,
it tastes different.
It
Yeah.
tastes better, yeah.
So there's a good study done on, I think they did it with kids that were 4 years old, and they gave them a lolly, and they said, "Oh, if you can wait,
You wait, yeah.
you know." And the kids that could wait, when they followed them through life,
Much
like
happier.
happier, and they were way more successful because they understood the concept of, well, if I
Things
wait a
take
bit more, then I can actually have more later. You know what I mean? So I thought that was
Yeah, it's a great study, mate. You know, and that's brilliant that you're present to that, because there's lots of great psychology stuff that sort of isn't really in the mainstream. And if you can draw, but that delayed gratification, immediate gratification, is a major problem, right? Globally, you know, we want it now.
Yeah. And like you said, society pushes us to do that, because then we,
Reinforces it,
you know what I mean? So then we, you know, it's about them making the money, you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Well, I could, you know, I think that this podcast's really been very positive, and to be controversial, I could really slag society off if I wanted to, and the disease model, and the blame game, and it's someone else's problem, and, you know, what did John Lennon say? Death and taxes, you know, that's what's happening. And I learned a long time ago about, and I don't want to be too morbid, but if you look at the headstone on your grave, so you're born in 1975 and you die in 2032, and you are the dash in between those two dates. How do you want that dash to be? And I think that's a lovely approach to, because that's what it's about, you know.
Yeah.
Do you want it to be?
I've done an exercise that does something very similar to that.
Is that about writing your obituary and how are you going to be remembered?
And then you write your chapters to now, and then you write the chapters that you want to be, you know what I mean? And then you and it really gets you thinking about, I suppose, getting you out of the day to day, you know what I mean? And go, well, what do I actually want the rest of my life to learn? Because you are the artist, you are the person to.
And that's what I was saying about tabula rasa, the blank canvas. You're painting the picture for you, and I think that's really powerful. You know, it's lovely that you touched on that. But as an exercise, and we sort of look at different techniques, maybe the journaling and writing it down. There's another big piece of research that was done in the 60s that they had two groups, and one group, and the youngsters, one group physically wrote down what it was they wanted to achieve and where they wanted to get to in their lives, and the other group didn't. They just verbalized it, articulated it. The people who actually went through the process of writing it down were the ones that achieved their
Yeah.
goals and aims.
Yeah.
And so that investment and taking the time, I'm a big advocate of journaling.
Yeah.
And it's not for anybody else to read, diarising. It's not to give to your psych or for anyone else to look at. It's just a cathartic process of you almost not doing the running around in the head miles all the time.
It allows you to, I think, for me anyway, I'm not doing any journaling. I know I should be, and it's something I go
Don't shut on
through.
me.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. It's something that I've done in the past, and it's worked really well. At the moment, I'm not doing it, and I will be doing it again in the future.
Now I don't want to be your shrink, but why aren't you doing that? Because I could turn that into a form. Why aren't you doing what you know is good for you? Go on.
Well, why?
It's a bit heavy. I put you in the spot.
yeah.
But why wouldn't you? You obviously go to the gym because that's healthy and beneficial.
Yeah.
You wouldn't eat chips
I believe,
all day, every day. Why don't you do your journaling?
And this is totally an excuse. I think I'm a little bit time poor, especially when I'm away at work.
Yeah.
And because I work on a week and then off a week, it disrupts like a routine. When I was journaling a lot, I was working here at home, and I was sort of had a constant routine. So because I work away, I've got a certain routine, and when I come home with a certain routine, it kind of muddles that. And like I said, basically it's an excuse. But yeah. Thank you for listening to the Neuronirvana podcast. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to know a bit more about us, jump on Instagram, Neuronirvana_ and Neuronirvana on Facebook. Also, if you'd like to check out our services and if we can help you in any way, jump on our website, neuronirvana.com.au.